The governance of international investment is fragmented and contested. The United Nations says cross-border investment has been governed by nearly 3,000 bilateral investment treaties and over 300 international investment agreements. The guiding principles issued by the G20 Summit in Hangzhou aim to create an open and transparent environment for cross-border investors. The principles will also serve as the first global framework for multilateral rules for international investment.
强调这个投资领域的开放。
The guiding principles highlight the necessity for openness in cross-border investment. Countries should slash barriers to facilitate cross-border investment and make sure their preferential policies will be shared by all investors, no matter if they are domestic or foreign.
China's legislators have been working to ease legal limits on foreign investors' accessibility to the Chinese market. An active list will be drafted, and foreign investors will have access to all sectors beyond the list without any paperwork.
So we have 4% today in China. I think if you look at that relative to our investment in the US, we have about 40% in the US. So first largest economy in the world, 40%, second, 4%. That doesn't intuitively feel right. Over time, they're going to converge.
A change in the role of the G20 is also underway. Analysts believe the release of the investment guiding principles marks a step for the transition of the G20 from a crisis response mechanism to one of long-term governance. Wang Xiaozhou, CCTV.
Right, let's get into the nitty-gritty details of exactly what was agreed to. Grant Masterson is a Senior Programs Officer at the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy. He's live in Johannesburg right now. Thank you for your time this evening. Let's start with the broad strokes here. Given the fact that quite a few of these G20 members have either had a change of leadership or they will be heading into an election like the United States, for example, how credible really is this commitment by the group to lower trade costs and make trade and investment policy a lot more coherent?
I'm sorry, Rama, I didn't get that question.
Let me repeat that. How credible is this commitment by the G20 to lower trade costs? Yet a lot of these countries are heading into, either have had an election or are heading into one, and amid that entire kerfuffle, they're having this rhetoric that's essentially anti-trade. I mean, it does seem like there's a bit of hypocrisy here, doesn't it?
Well, I think that in the global economy of today, that disruption and breaks in leadership, breaks in all kinds of continuity are definitely the new normal. So it stands to reason that leaders are coming and going. That's almost appropriate given the state of the global economy, the state of global business, global trade. And so I think that both investors and political leaders are having to make peace with the fact that we're in a much more volatile environment now than when the G20 was formed in 1999. That being said, the G20 is a collection of states, the 20 richest states in the world. So it's an agreement between states, and the personalities, while important, are peripheral to the agreements that are set up between these states.
Indeed. We also had a recommitment to the BEPS process, that's base erosion and profit shifting, which the OECD has been looking into, but not much on issues deemed to be controversial by some, like country-by-country tax reporting. Is this row between the EU and the US over Apple's aggressive tax planning, for example, likely to derail any efforts to comprehensively rewrite the rules around global taxation?
Yeah, this is a big issue, and unfortunately the Hangzhou consensus has not been very forthcoming on detail. This is not a process that has begun here in China. It's been going on for about 3 to 4 years now. And as you mentioned, in particular, the case of Apple being taxed in Europe and being taxed in the US after engaging in what is known as BEPS is a particularly problematic test case. It's an interesting discussion because what has happened is that with China chairing this particular G20, they've really wanted to push a recommitment to the principles of globalization and free trade, because China itself is the primary beneficiary of an open market system globally. And yet in an open market system, what we are discovering is that in particular with the clever use of accounting practices by multinational corporations, states are actually missing out significantly on what should be legitimate corporate taxes from these multinationals. So almost the two agendas of the Chinese as the hosts and the initiative to clamp down on tax havens and base erosion and pricing, it's almost working at cross purposes here in Hangzhou.
Indeed. Let's talk about South Africa, where of course you are at the moment. It went into this event with a serious credibility challenge, let's put it that way, especially given the mining minister's comments on how banks should handle highly exposed political personalities. In your opinion, how much damage has all this squabbling in government and the mixed messaging caused to the country's perception, especially among investors?
Yeah, unfortunately, our government is not doing a lot to instill investor confidence in South Africa at the moment. And President Jacob Zuma was no doubt working hard on the sidelines in Hangzhou to try and bolster that confidence amongst his political peers. But unfortunately, when you get mixed messaging coming out of our government, and there has been a lot of that in the last couple of weeks, quite unfortunately, then it does tend to make investors wonder whether the government is actually clear on what its policies are going forward. Unfortunately, we can't ask international investors to take our government seriously when there are a lot of people internally within the country who are also questioning the mining minister's comments, as well as the comments of several other ministers over the past couple of weeks, which, as you say, really does have a detrimental impact on the confidence of investors, and in the long term that is likely to hurt investment opportunities in South Africa. What we really need to see, I think, is the President and those senior ministers in Cabinet standing up and presenting a united front and really presenting a clear case of policy direction for the South African government at the moment.
Indeed. One final question for you, Grant. The G20 also put into its communique a commitment to focus on the massive displacement crisis, the worst since the Second World War, next year. But given the push in a lot of these states, from the UK, for example, with Brexit, to the anti-immigrant rhetoric we're seeing in the United States in the run-up to the November election, I mean, how credible is that commitment?
Yeah, and that comes back to the point I made earlier, that as hosts, China have really been trying to push this open economy, which includes obviously open borders and the freeing up of the movement of peoples between various countries. But exactly as you've referenced, Brexit has been a big blow to the European experiment of integrating the European economy, and comments coming out of presidential candidates in the US also sends a damaging signal. And I think that we need to look particularly here at the African dynamic here. 25% of the world's migrants, both economic and due to insecurity, reside in Africa right now. And a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of money and resources are being expended on dealing with that migrant crisis in Africa. But it's really, it's akin to putting the lid on top of a bottle. And those forces are building significantly. I'm not sure that we appreciate just how significant this displacement crisis is at present, but it's certainly not going to get any better. And it, some of the other issues discussed in Hangzhou include climate change. Africa is being disproportionately impacted by climate change, which is again leading to the mass displacement of peoples who need to move in particular ways to try and find a subsistence living. And so we're really looking at a building of pressures across the continent of Africa and indeed globally, which it seems as though a lot of our leaders seem to be out of tune with. These forces threaten to really overtake matters, to really bring things to a head much sooner than our leaders seem to be appreciating. And we need to see much more urgent and much more rapid action, in particular on this displacement issue, than we're seeing right now.
Indeed. Thank you for that. That's Grant Masterson. He's a Senior Programs Officer, as I mentioned earlier, with the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy. Thank you for your time.